All right. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you all are here. I wanted to introduce myself really quickly. My name is Heidi, and I am the Director of Communications here at YouthWorks. And thank you again for joining us. So we're going to kind of jump right in right now and just wanted to share briefly about who YouthWorks is in case you're not familiar with us. And while I'm talking, if you want to just kind of drop in that chat window where you're joining us from, where you're watching from, maybe let us know if you have ever been on a YouthWorks trip or a Border Perspective trip before. That would be great. You can just type that right in there. But if you're not familiar with YouthWorks, we are an organization. Our vision is that we create a world where Christ followers are known for hospitality, service, and justice. That's really the heart of who we are. And our mission is that we create experiences that empower this generation to love their neighbors. So we show up with relationships first. We believe in respectful service, and we believe in being resource ready and real world experiences. So again, thank you for joining us today. And one of the ways, or several of the ways that you can get involved with us in the experiences that we offer, we have pre-packaged mission trips. These are available in 15 locations across the United States, including Puerto Rico. And these are for middle schoolers and high schoolers, and these happen in the summertime. And then we also have a few other offerings. We have custom mission trips is available in more than 30 locations. This you can bring all ages, whether that's middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students, young adults, and those can happen year round. We also do summer internships for young adults, and our newest offering, service learning trips, that is for high school and young adults. So a couple of housekeeping items here for us. We are going to do a quick Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and drop those in the Q&A, and we will get to that at the end. And also, we're going to be sending you an email after this webinar within the next few days that has a video of everything that we did today, and also that has the links to any resources. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Carlos and Jan.
Thanks, Heidi. Thank you guys all for jumping in here. I am excited to do this. Jan's a pro at webinars. Border Perspective does webinars all the time. I don't, so I'm just glad to do this and see all of you jumping into this room and hanging out with us today. Thank you guys for pouring into the lives of young people, whether you are a youth pastor or you're at a campus ministry at a university, or maybe you're a young adult pastor or serve somewhere else with young people. Thank you. And thanks for just being willing to jump into a conversation about having conversations with young people about difficult topics that are going on in the world and helping them better make a difference in those places. As Heidi said, my name is Carlos. I am the president here at YouthWorks. I joined the team about 3 years ago, and in really jumping into YouthWorks and seeing all the great ministry that's happening, my background is more in the local church. Like I've been a youth pastor, been a discipleship pastor, been involved in church planting, and kind of looking at our ministry and organization from the lens of spiritual formation a little bit more. I just saw all these amazing partnerships that we have, and just have been wondering the last few years, is there a better way for us to utilize our network of partnerships and the way that we serve to better connect young people to answer some of the tough questions they're answering and help them address and right many of the wrongs that they see in the world. And so that kind of conversation and that process has led us to things like service learning and having more conversations like this on how do we help this generation connect their faith to the causes they care about the most. So that's a little bit of me and my background. Jan, tell them about you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you, team, for all of this. And thank you all for joining us today. We know that this is a pivotal conversation, a pivotal time to address how do we continue to dive deeper into just connecting these larger causes that we all feel they're around us. We're seeing them all around us in our day to day. And how do we connect them to the next gen? How do we make it a practical reality as a part of our discipleship, a part of our just journeying together with the next generation? And so my name's Jonathan Moya. I lead a ministry called Border Perspective, and we focus our work really on immigration, specifically at the U.S. and Mexico border, where we engage a service learning posture and model to bring people and really journey alongside them to help them understand the complexity of this larger issue that is immigration, but then contextualize it and make it really practical for them to engage. And so we work with, a mix of ages of groups when it comes to teenagers and young adults and adults. And so I'm excited to engage this conversation, Carlos. I'm excited that as a network of ministries, we continue to engage this deeper and at the same time bring others along so that they can also continue to journey with us and learn together.
Yeah. I want to start just by talking a little bit about why we're even having this conversation in the first place. So I'm going to give you a couple statistics. This is a statistic like this and others you'll see all over the place, but 1/3 of those who claim no faith think that the church is making a positive difference in the world. You could flip that stat too. So think about this. People who do not believe in Jesus or follow Jesus, 2/3 of them do not believe that the church is making a positive difference in the world. And that has a big impact in two ways. One, that means that if we're not showing the world that we are making a difference, then we're not reaching people who don't know Jesus yet. Like, we're not reaching them well if we're not in a posture that says we have something great to offer the world and to meet the needs of the people that are around us. So we're not going to be able to reach people, and we're not going to be able to retain those who are in the church and the young people that are in our churches. When you think about the fact that I don't have this stat here, but about 1 million young people are leaving the church every year. We need to do a better job at capturing their heart if they're going to stay with us inside of our ministries and inside of our churches. A couple other stats for you. 3/4 of nonprofits have staffing vacancies right now. Most of those are for roles that interact with the public the most. This came from the National Council of Nonprofits, and it really blew my mind when I saw this a couple of weeks ago. 3/4 of organizations that are working directly with meeting the needs of people in various communities around this country cannot find people to work in them. And so I think about all the thousands of teenagers and young people that we connect in these different communities that are volunteering in organizations like this and are interacting with the public, that are interacting with those who have different backgrounds and different needs. And for me, I continue to think, man, I want Jesus followers filling these roles. I want people who love Jesus and who love their neighbors well to be the ones working in different organizations and nonprofits that are meeting the needs and that are helping the poor and that are feeding the hungry and that are doing all these different things. We should be at the forefront of work like that as Christ followers. And so I want to fill that pipeline with folks that go there. I also think about filling this leadership pipeline and with pastors and with other church leaders. 70% of pastors agree that it's hard to find mature and young Christians who desire to become a pastor. And so when I think about just the needs that our country, that our different communities face, I want to see the church be at the forefront of addressing those, which means we need to fill the pulpits. We need to fill the churches with leaders who care for their neighbors, who care for those who have needs, that are actually implementing in their church models programs and initiatives and partnering and collaborating with others to meet the needs and to see justice and to see the kingdom in their own communities. And so if it's hard to find pastors and leaders now, and we continue to see this downtrend of young people in our churches, my fear is, what does that mean 5, 10, 15 years from now when we think about the church and who's leading them? I want to help fill churches and fill particularly church leaders with folks who are passionate about not only their individual faith in Jesus, but their faith in what that means and how they treat other people and what it means for justice in their communities, and that churches would be led in that way. That starts with young people now, like how we train them, the experiences that we give them now end in that, which is why I think this conversation is so important. I know, for many of us, we probably understand who Gen Z is or have an idea. And when I said cause, you had enough of an idea about that because you jumped on this webinar. But just wanted to define it, at least the way that we're going to use it in this conversation. When we talk about Gen Z, we're referring to people that were born roughly between 1999 and 2015. Of course, different studies use slightly different dates. So this is, think middle school through you've graduated college, and folks who are entering maybe their first jobs or their career right now. That's roughly Gen Z and the folks we're talking about. When you think about this demographic, the study from Barna a few years ago, the Open Generation, noted that 75% of teenagers that they were studying, which would be Gen Z at the time, say that they are either oriented or motivated towards justice. So when we think about this generation, know that this is something that is incredibly important to young people and to this generation. And I would argue that as church leaders, we have not emphasized or addressed the care and the concern that this generation has enough. And we need to be doing a better job at it when we think about 75% say that they are oriented towards or very motivated in their life towards addressing justice issues. Cause. What do I mean when I say that? You might hear us use language of injustice or justice and cause and use those similarly. So think about different forms of injustice or these areas where people are receiving an unfair or undeserved treatment. When you look at various studies of Gen Z and look at the different areas that they are concerned about or the causes that they say they care about, these are some of them. Again, lists can vary, but these tend to rise to the top. Extreme poverty is important to this generation. Climate change, mental health, racial injustices, and human trafficking are some of the issues that this generation very much is concerned about, and they want to make a difference in. So with that, how do we have conversations, and how do we help this generation better connect to these different causes and these different issues? Before we even talk about what we do and even what YouthWorks does and how we're trying to help, I want to start with just remembering that this starts with you. This starts with me. If we're not providing a proper context for these sort of sometimes difficult conversations to happen, we're not going to move forward in how we address this with generation. Like we're not going to help them connect their faith to these issues if we're not providing the proper space for them to do it in. And so I really think about three spaces when we think about this. The first one is in just your ministry or your discipleship model. So when you think about all the things that you do in your ministry and the way that you spend your time operating your ministry, is your model more based on education or is it more of a relational discipleship model? Because I would argue, and I'd really like you to consider that if we're going to help this generation to connect with these issues and help them connect their faith in what Scripture has to say, that is best done in the context of relationships and numerous conversations than it is with, let's say, a sermon series that you do. Now, I've not been a pastor, I've given sermons, I've developed curriculum. This is not to say that those aren't helpful and that those aren't good things. They are. But these are difficult topics. They're nuanced issues, and there's questions, and there's very strong emotions and very strong feelings. And so we need to have relationships, and our ministries should be built in a way that have enough relationships between young people and between adults so that conversations can happen over time. I'll send you guys a resource to help if you want to think more about what does it look like for my ministry to become more relationally oriented. Our friends at 10 by 10 have developed some great resources there that we'd love to send your way to help you develop more of a relational discipleship model in your ministry. Another thing to think about, though, is with your time, are you serving or engaging in these issues? If young people are not seeing us, maybe those who are a little older or maybe leading in those ministries, if we're not serving, if we're not volunteering, if we're not expressing concern for these issues ourselves, and particularly with what we do with our time, are we going to be trusted when it comes to the conversation with them and their questions and their issues, or maybe the ways that they're thinking about their own calling in life? We need to be people that are trusted, and that we're viewed as, this is something, and it's maybe not every issue that's out there that we're engaging in, but that we care about justice, that we care about the needs of our neighbors. And that's evident by the way we spend our time in the places that we serve in our community. If we are a people as leaders who are actively engaging and actively serving in our communities, that's going to make a much easier platform for a young person to trust us to start a conversation around something like food insecurity or racial injustice or climate or any of these other areas if they're seeing the care that we have. And finally, in your conversations. So think about when you're talking with a young person, or maybe you're commenting on that thing that was posted online. Maybe it's a hot button issue. Are you more callous or are you more curious? I think this is incredibly important because all of us, we all have opinions. Like let's be real. All of us have opinions. We have thoughts. I'd even go further. We have convictions over some of these issues that we're talking about. We have things that we believe the Bible teaches or things that we believe the Bible doesn't teach. But the posture in that conversation is incredibly important. Do I enter that conversation from a place of, I need to show that I'm right, or I need to defend my position, or I need to give you all the statistics to back up my point and give that to you? Or am I coming in those conversations with a posture of curiosity and trying to understand, particularly young people, understand what they're feeling, understand what they're thinking, understand why they feel so strongly about that wrong that they see in the world? What are they thinking about their role for that in the future? I think as believers, we need to be far more curious and ask far more questions and seek to understand and listen far more if we're going to move the needle forward in connecting this generation to the causes that they care obviously so deeply about. So let's talk a little bit more about the conversations. And with that, I'm gonna send it over to Jan. When it comes to service learning and even this entire conversation that we're having around issues, Jan has been my go-to. He gave some of his story, but he's doing an incredible job at having conversations and bringing people to the Texas-Mexico border. And so I want to hear him talk a little bit more about conversations he had, how to have great conversations, and how to tell great stories. So Jan, go for it.
Thank you, Carlos, and thanks for setting that foundation of how it starts with us. It really, the best way to model and really to preach, right? It's not necessarily from the stage or the pulpit, but it's the way that we're living our lives. It's the way that we're reflecting the kingdom of God through the way that we're living that out. And so I want to talk a little bit about, just go deeper into the conversations. When we are discussing issues, conversations, one of the things that we all know is that because of our digital age that we live in, because of the digital language that Gen Z speaks, is that many issues are bombarding us every single day. We're getting news from all over the world. We're seeing things from every aspect of the globe. And so how do we make these global issues local? Because oftentimes we carry the weight of that pain or see an injustice. And so we are realizing oftentimes that Gen Zers care about global problems, like you mentioned, Carlos. It could be immigration, food insecurity, racial injustice, or any other sort of cause, but oftentimes feel powerless to do anything about them because maybe, it's in another part of the world or something. And so where do we meet that gap between the global and how do we make it personal? Because if we don't do that, then it just becomes paralyzing and we might just get stuck. And so a couple of encouragements here is, how do we tell stories of those that are around us? How do we make these more personal? Is there a family? Is there a student? Is there something in our community? Has our church seen a situation like this that maybe embodies or connects to the larger issue? How do we connect that story to our students' own community? For us at the border, the story of the border might sound really far away from many people, but we know that many cities around the nation have people that have immigrated here and people that are also seeking refuge or might have come as refugees. So how do we encounter them? How do we connect the dots there? How do we use everyday metaphors, right? And things that our students are already engaged in to bridge that gap between the big global headlines that are coming through our news feed and connected to daily life? How do we become those witnesses in our Jerusalem, in our Judea, in Samaria, and yes, to the ends of the earth? So notice we have to start local. We have to start where we are to then mobilize and encourage students to have a ripple effect outward. The next thing would be focusing on people and not issues. Oftentimes, for me at Border Perspective, is people say, well, you engage a lot in the issue of immigration. And so I like to make that more personal and not focus on the issue, but focus on the person or the face, the immigrant versus immigration. And so issues often feel abstract. But when you talk to people, when you put a name to someone who is dealing with the situation, um, we've seen that Gen Z is drawn to these powerful stories of lived experiences and authentic voices, rather than just arguments that are political or that are divisive. How we avoid leading really with statistics or even just ideologies or personal stances, but how do we frame and start with someone's story, someone's name, someone's situation that we're connected with? How do we humanize the cause really by telling about this individual's resilience, their dignity, their faith, their value of being created in the image of God through the midst of their struggles? Really, when teaching, we try to make this person's story, humanity central to what we're engaging, not just the problem that they're dealing with, because more than not, that's when we can find connection between one another. And so one of the other segments here is, how do we move when we're engaging these causes and Gen Z towards action? One of the things that I've learned as a millennial is that I thought I cared about justice, but I've heard that Gen Z is millennials on steroids. So they want us to point them towards action. So what do we do with this? It's not just something that they want to, swipe through or see and let go of, but if stories don't connect to action, then they really risk becoming just inspiration without transformation. And so, how do we always make sure that as we're leading this next generation, how do we link them to a story, and give them concrete steps? Pray for so and so, volunteer with, maybe as practical as maybe sharing a meal, or doing something practical for our neighbors, providing small, clear pathways first, really before calling them to larger commitments. I know that our programs oftentimes are run by these larger commitments, but how do we give them easy wins? Maybe it's inviting them to meet somebody, writing notes of encouragement, maybe donating something from their home or something that they care about to meet a need. But how do we frame the action as participation in God's ongoing story, not just us saving or helping out specifically? And so think about this in that context. How do we bring these issues from really large global issues to local context? How do we frame and focus on the personal stories of people and not so much the issues? And then ultimately, always, how do we point the Gen Z towards action?
Hey, Jan, I on that last slide on having conversations, something I continue to think about
Hmm.
is the connection between, these conversations that you're having about this cause. And I'm going to go back to that like relational discipleship model, because most of these things I don't think happen in the context of us as leaders just making statements to young people all the
Hmm.
time and
Yeah.
telling them the answers. It comes far more through the questions that we ask.
Yes.
So like when you talk about making global issues local, if I hear or I'm in a conversation with a young person, they're talking about this national issue or this really big cause, flipping the question and saying, well, where do you see that at your school? Or where do
Mm,
you see that in your community?
yeah.
Or who do you know that has experienced that? Tell me what you know about their story. Or have you experienced that? Those are all questions that come up in discipleship if we have, relationships with them. Or, hey, what
Mhm.
organization do you know that is addressing this issue by you? Have you ever volunteered there before? Do you know anybody there? When's a time that we could go together? So to me, the tie between relational discipleship and relational ministry and having these proper conversations, it comes back so much to the questions that we're asking, and
Definitely.
us as leaders asking far more questions than we are making statements and pretending like we're the experts on all of these various issues, because we're not. I'm not, for sure.
Every question that I always ask, and people sometimes are hesitant about questions. It's like, no, actually, I love questions because I think your question might be a new question that I never gotten or received, and it actually makes me wrestle or think more deeply into, you know, what I actually how I'm framing whatever I'm sharing about. And so I love that. So thanks for sharing that, Carlos. I think that's a very practical way as well to think about all of this. As we move on to just kind of storytelling, before sharing a story, we want to reflect and ask ourselves, and we introduced here several questions, and so um, stories are vital to helping understand these large causes. Again, um, in the way that we make them personal to individuals and specifically the next generation, they will connect and they will be impacted when we make them really accessible. And so, storytelling for us at the US Mexico border has been a vital approach into how we engage and journey with people. And part of that is because we're not necessarily just focusing on the policy and the nuance of the region and the conversation, but really we're trying to give people context. We're trying to give people perspective and understanding. And so in order for us to do that is creating a space where we can reflect. And so we'll start with this first question. Am I centering as myself instead of the person or the people telling the story? Are we telling the story about our experience, about the people, or about the people of God at work? Are we placing ourselves as the center, as the heroes, or are we pointing people in how we're sharing to what God has already been doing through those that we're partnering with? Oftentimes, a good friend of ours definitely reminds us all the time as he says, you're just joining the work of God that's already ongoing in most communities, almost in all communities that we engage with. So how do we frame that? How do we really go from centering ourselves to really guiding people towards, okay, God's already at work, and how are we joining him? Oftentimes, causes, issues are you can't are very complicated. And so when we tell stories, are we oversimplifying someone's struggle? Are we reducing this complex life into sometimes, as leaders, as teachers, we like to have illustrations for our sermons and our talks. And yes, while those might win attention and um, give us, maybe statements to share, this oftentimes risk dishonoring the real tension that this nuance carries, oversimplifying someone's struggle. Oftentimes, when we are engaging with these difficult causes, there's a lot of nuance, and it's less about the black and white and more about the gray. And so, how do we do this in a way that's always honoring the tension? Tension is something that is hard for us to sit in, but I'll tell you that over the last many years that we've been engaging difficult conversations with people of faith, we have to be able to sit in the tension longer. We have to be able to engage that tension. so that we can then reflect and carry forth a healthier conversation. Another thing is, are we reinforcing stereotypes? Does the story that we're sharing, that we heard, does this perpetuate labels? Or what story is it telling? Does it show a community's, a person's full humanity and their dignity in God's image? Or are we just reinforcing what we already know, that might be a misconception or misunderstanding? I think back about um, a friend of mine who I was traveling with, and he was telling me about, um, as he was hosting different groups in his country. He's like, why do people always take pictures of the trash in my country? That might be new for us who are new to this country, who are serving, who are coming alongside our friends in this country. But it's like, why don't they take the photos of the beach, which was also right there? Why don't they take photos of, just the vitality, the beauty, and sometimes the beauty within the chaos, or the beauty within the brokenness? Because everywhere we look, how we frame it, how we share, even in our storytelling, through our words, through our visuals, are we dignifying those stories? Are we really emphasizing a broader humanity, right? Rather than just reinforcing stereotypes. So, as we move to how to introduce a cause to our teenagers and students, um, I want us to focus on how we frame it, because framing it is so vital and important. We don't just want to lead with statistics or headlines. Yes, statistics, numbers, percentages, research can inform us, but rarely do they inspire. Numbers alone won't move our hearts. Um, Really, we want to anchor these stories in and frame them into God's grand narrative. I'll tell you, I don't think it matters the issue, but every issue, whether it's immigration, food insecurity, racial injustice, makes sense only in light of creation, dignity in the fall, which is brokenness, redemption, that is Christ's work, and restoration in God making all things new. Every issue, every issue anchors a story, is anchored in the story of God's grander narrative. So offer a biblical lens, offer some theological background. How do we help students to see a cause not as a random crisis, but as a part of what God's already doing, and really God's story in bringing healing to our communities and bringing healing to the world that we live in? The stories often aren't random, but how do we really continue to walk with students in waving into their story God's bigger plan to make all things new? And after you share the story, we want to engage students. We want to give them tangible ways to interact with, well, what they've heard, with what they've seen. A couple of practical things is, let's re-narrate these, this experience in your own words. Maybe as we break them up in small groups, or as we have them journal, let's ask students to retell this story. This might help them tell it and remember it in their own way, make it personal. Maybe the emotions that it drew, maybe how it made them feel. But how do we translate this into, also, into the language of Gen Z, which is digital spaces, social media, right? Sometimes it's easy for us to, like I mentioned earlier, just post about something and it is edifying a narrative that we already know, or instead of maybe challenging that beauty within that brokenness. So how are we mindful about even just how we're engaging and sharing this in digital platforms in a way that honors the dignity of people in the story? How do we draw connections to their world? How do we ask, where do we see a version of this again in their school, their church, their campus, their neighborhood? And then again, pointing towards response, invite prayer, reflection, and practical steps. The story shouldn't end with the storyteller, but really it should multiply throughout the students themselves. And so hopefully all of these elements have just get us thinking. We know that in a 45-minute webinar, we would love to go deeper in all of this, but Carlos and I, as we were putting this together and the team, we were just wanted to give you a taste of really into our hearts and our minds in ways that we see healthier service, healthier mobilization happening in a way that can really help us engage the next generation to have an approach that will be worthwhile and ultimately coming alongside the story, the grander story of what God's already doing in our world.
Jan, I'm really, of course, and I said this before, my background more so in the local church than in an organization that does trips. And so I think in terms of how I teach sometimes, or maybe how I give a sermon or a conversation, maybe in a Bible study context, um, the topic of immigration comes up in a conversation, and you talk about connecting it to the larger biblical narrative. I know your expertise and your experience is so much in immigration. Tell me, like, you're in that conversation, do that for me. Like, give me an example. How does immigration connect to the larger biblical narrative? Like, how would you explain
Yeah,
that to a student?
I'll tell you that a lot of the people that we host at the US and Mexico border are coming because of what they're seeing on the headlines, right? So we've had people that say, "Hey, we want to come see the border fence, the border wall. We want to see." I had somebody say to me, "I want to see, take me to the images that I see on the news." Well, yes, that is part of a reality of the region of the border, but that is not the ultimate story, right? And so, how we do service learning at the US Mexico border is we ask people before we actually engage any big conversation or any tangible service, we ask people to step back and really step into this community, this invitation as learners. Let's actually sit back and listen. Let's hear from those that are active on the ground. Let's hear from those that are already doing this work and have been for a long time. How do we honor their story? How do we honor their resilience and sacrifice? How do we contextualize what God is doing here and has been doing already before we came to visit? Because the story of the church at the border is that God's been miraculously working at the border for many, many decades, before probably my time and probably more beyond my time if he doesn't come before then. But it's like there's a grander faith narrative, there's a grander spiritual narrative within this. And so, how do we contextualize it? And then ultimately, we try to journey alongside local immigrant leaders because they know the nuance. They are the ones in the communities. They are the ones that can tell us, you know what? Yes, this is a part of the border, but this is what we're focusing on. This is a need. This is an opportunity. This is also a reality, right? Because we know that any issue, any cause, specifically in immigration, there is conversations about compassion, and sometimes we leave it at that. But there's also conversations about rule of law. And for us, what we try to do is we want to provide a holistic understanding and perspective on actually scripture talks about both. There's Matthew is as equal as Leviticus, right? In Romans 13 and all these verses around compassion. So like we actually let's explore it and wrestle with the tension of how do we actually do both well. And so storytelling is a huge part of it. Journeying alongside people, reflecting, listening, and coming alongside leaders
Yeah,
has been a proven method for us over the years.
yeah. Thanks, Jan. as we talk about this, if you're tracking with us, when we think about connecting this gen and their faith to these different causes, wanted to introduce first the concept of conversation. Like, it changes the way we have conversations with them. It also changes the way that we tell stories with them. But the third aspect that we would emphasize in connecting to these causes would be the experiences that we take young people through. And we do have the opportunity to disciple and spiritually form young people in the context of various experiences. So I threw these up on the slide just to give some examples of what I mean by maybe formative experiences. You could think of service projects, maybe mission trips or service trips, depending on how you talk about those. Immersive experiences. Some of you might be more familiar with these than others, but immersive experience would be like maybe you do a pilgrimage through the South and you do civil rights tours, or maybe some of you have done tours or had conversations with different faith leaders. And you've learned about other religious groups in your community, and maybe you tour different types of religious buildings or have conversations. That's an immersive experience to learn by being around people and being immersed in a certain community. Those are immersive experiences. What we're talking about when we talk about service learning would be blending some different concepts from really all three of these other types of experiences. How do we emphasize in maybe a week-long or so trip both immersive learning and kind of up that learning component that Jan talks about that he does on the border, and then also having the tangible hands-on service. I know, Jan, you've been doing service learning for years at the Texas-Mexico border. Tell me a little bit about some of the differences that you've seen or you've experienced with, what you'd consider a little bit more service learning versus maybe traditional mission trip.
Yeah, often, yeah. And this, I think if you're in the youth space and if you've worked in missions for a while, and whether you're a mobilizer and a youth leader, I think we've all seen over the last several years just kind of a shift happen within the mission space, mission trips. And so I think a lot of it has to also deal with what we're wrestling with as a nation, and also as the world, and everything's shifting before us. And so oftentimes I think, have prioritized over time short-term missions as something that is just about doing something about that really becomes about projects. And so oftentimes that really gives us an ability to mobilize people towards something tangible, towards doing something impactful within that time frame of a beginning and an ending of an experience. But with service learning, we're really trying to address the nuance again. Why are communities in the state that they're in? Why is this issue actually impacting a large amount of people? What are the systems, right, that actually keep certain people under, say, oppression? Or what are the systems and the infrastructure that actually limits the fact that there's so many food deserts in a certain region? Why are there racial points, or if we see racial injustice, what are those points throughout history that have led us to this, right, to this reality today? And so we emphasize a huge aspect of the education and the equipping even before, and we really want to prioritize that even before we start engaging with our hands, right? Because once we actually have even if it's a basic understanding of the reality of our neighbors, wherever that is, whatever causes we're talking about, actually then the tangible will actually have more meaning. The tangible will actually be understood if we're working at a food bank, if we're working and building a church, if we're working at a food pantry or a soup kitchen or serving the homeless, or, it actually will be contextualized better for us, and it will create a lot more value. And I think tangible connection towards our action.
Yeah. So a big conversation with us over the last couple of years, really, since I've been here at YouthWorks, is how do we scale this kind of model of a trip and experience? And we've learned a ton from Jan and border perspective, and we're looking at, can we do this type of experience? Yes, with immigration at the Texas-Mexico border, but could we expand this model into different places, maybe around different causes around the country? And so when we kind of break down that service learning model experience, we view that in three kind of major elements that one one trip or one experience would include education, it includes biblical reflection, and it includes hands-on service. And particularly, if you can take those three elements and make them all about one particular issue or one cause that we know this generation wants to plug into, that they want to see, they want to make a difference in this area, and they know that something's wrong that needs to be made right. They just don't know what next. That this model has a great potential to speak to that need and also equip people ultimately to go and make a difference themselves, or a different space that they feel called to individually. And so on any service learning experience that we're beginning to pilot and put out there, we're looking at how do we do education. We're going to implement different tours, museum visits, listening to local leaders and experts, receiving some teaching, maybe from a professor that is very knowledgeable in this topic, having discussion around sometimes difficult issues. Of course, we're going to have biblical reflection, not to give just all the answers on any of these issues, but to put the scripture in front of people and say, hey, here's the scripture that talks about this. You need to process and wrestle with this scripture yourself, and journal and think about how that informs your spiritual practices, and talk about what we're learning from scripture together on this experience. And then hands-on service. We don't just go to learn and to get information on an experience like this. We're going to do something. We're going to make a tangible difference. We're still going to have projects that are involved because there's learning in the process of actually doing as well. And it opens up our minds and the possibilities to the things that you might be able to go and do back home. And so we're really looking at how do we find new areas and causes and locations where we can implement this service learning model. One way that I've begun describing this is a master class meets a mission trip. That's what we're trying to do on service learning trips. And so we have launched this last year several locations that we're going to be implementing service learning trips. As you've heard Jan talk, those are South Texas trips. They're in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. They facilitate trips all summer long for groups. You can choose a date and go most weeks during the summer. And Jan and his team lead and facilitate those. Also, in regards to immigration, we're looking at trying to have and pilot a week in Houston, Texas, which some of you know, some of you don't. Houston is the most diverse major city in the country. Just so many immigrant groups and populations that have come to the city of Houston. An amazing ministry that churches and organizations are doing there. I'm trying to see if we can introduce some of you and your groups to the great work God is doing in the city of Houston. In the area of racial justice, we're working with the Center for Restorative Justice, which is out of Southern California. And their executive director has been leading. I did not mean to have a thumbs down. That should be a thumbs up for the great work of this. It's not there anymore. The great work that they're doing, but they lead tours in Southern California and throughout the South. And so we're partnering with them to be a learning partner to do some service learning trips. We'll have a couple of those in Montgomery, Alabama, which has an incredible complex of museums, giving a history of really the history of the United States and slavery, and through freedom and through the civil rights movement and resilience up to today. Just amazing learning that's in that community, as well as working with local service partners there. Also doing a racial justice experience in Los Angeles County. We have a spring break week available, as well as the first kind of week of the summer for most of us, starting on June 1st. And then here in Texas, we'll be facilitating a service learning trip around food insecurity. Texas, I'm in Texas, not something I'm proud of, or we should be proud of, but Texas leads the nation in those that are hungry, and people and families who are food insecure. And so we're going to be doing some teaching and service in Fort Worth, and we have 2 different weeks for that trip as well. So if you'd like any information about any of these trips, or learning a little bit more about what these will look like, please reach out, and you can reach out to me directly, and I'd love to talk with you more about these service learning trips we're piloting next year. I want to give you guys a few resources that you can take home that will be practical for you. Again, we'll include these in an email. Number one, I mentioned relational discipleship. Check out simplementoring.org. That's from our friends at 10 by 10. They've created some amazing free resources for you guys. on how to implement relational discipleship in the context of your ministry. I talked a lot about, and we talked a lot about questions and conversations. We have a great resource that was designed to have conversations and just a list of questions that you could ask after you do something like a mission trip or a service project. We'll send you that resource as well. Border Perspective and Jan put together a directory of organizations that are serving immigrants from around the country on a map. That's called a Beyond the Border directory. We'll send you a link to that in case particularly you want to maybe serve at one of those organizations in your own community. And finally, as we launch these service learning trips, for you guys joining, we want to send you guys a discount code in case your group would like to join us on one of these trips next summer. You can use the discount code SEPT, like September webinar, and you'll have $300 off for a group of 5 or more for next summer. So with that, I'd like to take the next few minutes and jump back into any content that you guys would like us to go back to or answer any questions that you guys have. Any questions pop up in the chat or the Q&A that we could jump a little bit more into?
Thank you for highlighting those resources, Carlos. Those are great. And so giving some of those to in an email will be fantastic for people to follow up with. So
awesome. I'm seeing no questions for now. Great resources. Thank you guys. Excited for the service learning trips. Awesome. Anybody have any, like on the service learning trips, any questions even about the service learning trips or what those will look like or how they're different from other trips? I know with our, I saw earlier, several of you have been on YouthWorks trips before. There's going to be similar elements to YouthWorks trip, but some elements are definitely going to be different. So where you've had and maybe our prepackaged mission trips, you might have like a few community hosts that are there. On these trips, you'll have, a community host that organizes logistics really for that trip and will guide kind of the schedule and make sure everybody gets where they need to go at the right time. But then the other person that's there is going to be an expert. So we're partnering with somebody that is an expert in this field because I'm not an expert in any of these fields. I want to learn from all these. I want to learn from Jan. I want to learn from John. I want to learn from the other John who runs an organization in food insecurity here in Fort Worth. So we're connecting you guys to experts on the ground as really folks who are helping facilitate and lead that experience. It's going to be a big kind of difference than maybe the traditional prepackaged trips that we've offered before. Middle school or high school students, these trips next year as we pilot this, we're targeting high school students and young adults. So these, due to a lot of the subject matter and we're not having as much on-site facilitation, we're skewing an older demographic for these experiences next year. So we're looking at high school and roughly college age or young adults on these trips next year for service learning. Yes, I did say I would be emailing the resources and the link to the map, the Beyond the Border. Yep, we'll put all those resources in a follow-up email with links to you guys. Good stuff. Anything else? I don't think so.
All right.
That's good.
Well,
thank you guys so much for joining. Like we said, we can keep the conversation going. If you guys have any more questions for us or need some more info, or if you say, hey, I'd love a resource on this, I don't know if we'll have it, but we may. And so we might be able to send you a different resource if you're looking for something else to help as well. We're here to serve you guys. And you guys are serving really on the front lines of ministry to this generation. So thank you guys again. See you next time.
Thank you so much for joining, everybody.